Доброго дня, ми раді вітати всіх.
Good afternoon. Greetings in Ukraine Crisis Media Center in Ukrainian House. My name is Darina Mikhaichuk. I'm the communication manager of the Green Restoration of Ukraine from Greenpeace, and I'm very glad to introduce part of our legendary team of Greenpeace in Ukraine, Shaun Burnie and Jan Vande Putte, our radiation expert who have more than 30 experience of work in Greenpeace, and they work with the nuclear issues, and also our partner, Pavlo Tkachenko, SaveDnipro, ecological organization from Dnipro, and also Polina Kolodyazhna, our project manager, campaigner of Green Restoration of Ukraine from Greenpeace. Today we are going to talk about the nuclear monitoring enhancement, and also we're going to talk about the hazards of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which can occur this winter, and that is actually the threat which constantly exists. Sometimes we forgot about it, but Greenpeace, together with SaveDnipro, have visited the last week the southern regions of Ukraine to enhance the nuclear monitoring in Ukraine and to place the radiation sensors which are needed to the local authorities in Zaporizhzhia, in Dnipro, in Yuzhno-Ukrainsk, Umань, Odessa, to track the radiation threats from the nuclear power plants and from the Russian occupiers, who are, of course, unpredictable. And they also met the local governors, and they had the meetings dedicated to increase the presence of Greenpeace in Ukraine. I would like to pass the floor to Polina Kolodyazhna, our project manager of Green Restoration of Ukraine, and she is going to tell us general information on the work of Greenpeace in Ukraine and about our. Thank you very much. Greenpeace, from the first days of the full-scale war, was providing the monitors, and starting from spring 2022, Greenpeace started the process of the restoration of the damaged infrastructural objects. And this project is called Green Restoration of Ukraine. Tobias Mishmaya is also present with us in the audience. So if you have questions to him, we will ask him to answer your questions. So we have not only this project, but also this project is aimed on the reconstruction, but also we add green technologies, for example, solar panels, heat pumps, and also we work a lot with territorial ramadas, and we help them to find their own way to reconstruct their territories. And another big direction of our work is monitoring and raising the awareness in the European Union on the horrors of the Russian war in Ukraine. And in the framework of the monitoring, in 2022, we had a mission to Chernobyl to record the consequences of the Russian occupation. And this year we continued this work. We went to Chernobyl, we were recording the consequences, and after that we went to the south of Ukraine, and there we placed the radiation indicators, and my colleagues will tell you more about it. Thank you. Thank you, Polina, and I'm passing the floor to Pavlo Tkachenko, the technical director of the organization SaveDnipro, our partner of Greenpeace in Ukraine, and together with Pavlo, we went to the south of Ukraine, Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Umань, Yuzhno-Ukrainsk, and Odessa, to place the indicators, and he will tell you more about his impressions and what was happening during this trip. Thank you very much.
Павло.
Thank you very much. My name is Pavlo, Technical Director of the NGO SaveDnipro. In last 20 months of the full-scale war in Ukraine, the Russian troops are constantly attacking nuclear objects, and they are spreading the fake news on the nuclear situation in Ukraine. And therefore, for our organization, it was a big challenge to enhance the informational communication on the nuclear situation in Ukraine, to have more open source data, to have the independent monitoring, to install more stations of the civil monitoring, especially around the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Thanks to our international partners, during summer we were able to install 10 devices around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but so why did we need to do that? Because if there is some threat, or if there is a fake news on the nuclear situation in Ukraine, everyone is looking for the information on the radiation. Everyone is looking for the answer to a simple question. They are just Googling it, and they find our research, they found our map, and in the last year and a half, it happened more than we had a dozen million viewers. And during the first month of the full-scale war, we had around 3 million people who wanted to know the nuclear situation in Ukraine. And then the next wave was when the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was under shelling, and more than 600,000 people monitored, observed the situation in Ukraine. And the last information is another fake is that during the shellings of Khmelnytskyi nuclear power plant, we also had a big wave of people who wanted to know what is the situation in Ukraine. And as a result, we understand that we need more independent stations, and therefore, together with Greenpeace and SaveDnipro, we started to work on this direction, and in summer we started to look for the new equipment which we can install in Ukraine. We found the company, and we started to get prepared to create a visually high quality product for everything to be at most accessible and understandable at the location. And we made nice stickers, nice boxes where we install the indicators for them to be protected from the environment. We created the cronstains, and every station was packed in the kit. So we are not installing it ourselves, but we are passing it to the local authorities, and they installed it. And we explain how to prepare it. And in the beginning of the previous week, a Greenpeace team came to Dnipro, and we took all these devices and we started our trip in the south of Ukraine. And as a result, during the week, we installed 6 devices. That is Zaporizhzhia, that is the first and the only monitoring station in Cherkasy, in Uman town. That is the closest station. That is the closest station for the civilians in Yuzhno-Ukrainsk. The closest indicator close to the nuclear station, that is Odessa, and also 2 additional stations in Odessa Oblast, in Yuzhno and Tarotino towns. And during our trip, we met the local authorities to explain them, to hear the local authorities and how they are communicating their civilians in these 20 months. What are their challenges during the shellings? And also we wanted to help the authorities with our small contribution to the nuclear safety and security, because we understand that during the full-scale war, the government is focused more on the support of the army, on the support of the IDPs who are living from the temporary occupied territories to the closest hromadas, and the radiation monitoring sometimes lacks finances. And therefore, we as NGOs, as civil organizations, we help the government to obtain more information. And in case some fakes would be released, the people will understand what is the nuclear situation. And in case we face provocations or issues on NPP, the government will have more information to make their decision. And it is important to remember that only state authorities have the right to announce the special situation, and therefore our support is another tile which will help the government to make the solution, to make the decision. Please follow the local authorities' official channel, the State Emergency Situation Service, and the other state services on this issue. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pavlo. Also, I would like to say that after we will present, the journalists will be able to ask their questions, to ask for more information. Also, for the international media, if you have questions, please write it in comment on our live stream, and we will read it, and your voice will be heard. So now I would like to pass the floor to Jan Vande Putte, for him to tell a bit. And what can I tell about Jan? Jan Vande Putte is a nuclear anti-energy campaigner from Belgium. He works in Greenpeace for around 30 years, and he is a head of the nuclear security group. And Jan has an experience in Fukushima, and he worked there during the first days in 2011. Also, he has an experience of working in India and the Russian Federation on NPPs, and he also visited Chernobyl in July 2022, and he personally saw the results of the Russian occupation of the NPP. And Jan continues his work in Chernobyl, and he is researching the consequences of the Russian occupation in Chernobyl. Jan and Shaun and our mission of Greenpeace, we visited southern regions, as it was already mentioned by Pavlo. But before that, we worked for 1 week in Chernobyl, where the work is ongoing and that is one of the stages of the big project of Greenpeace, which we will discuss later with the journalists. So Jan, please, the floor is yours. Tell us, please, more about the work in southern oblasts on the radiation sensors. Why do we need them for? And also about your work. Thank you.
And thank you, Pavlo, for your presentation. The reason why it's so important for Greenpeace to work with SaveDnipro to establish this elaborated network of sensors is because there is a serious threat from the Russian occupation, the Russian invasion for nuclear safety in Ukraine. So from the very beginning of the full-scale war from Russia in Ukraine, we've been focusing with my colleague Shaun on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So our first assessment was on the 2nd of March last year, 2 days before the Russian forces invaded the nuclear power plant. And we looked in technical detail about the possible risks if such an attack could happen. Unfortunately, it did happen. And so over the time, over almost, let's say, 20 months, this situation at Zaporizhzhia has evolved, and of course in the first phase the focus was on the risks of this invasion, which created a lot of damage itself. And then later on the focus shifted on the poor management of the power plant by Rosatom, also flying in new staff from Russia which was not qualified to work at that nuclear power plant, a whole series of consequences related to that. And then the Russian army exploded the Kakhovka dam, so losing this cooling water. Let's say the global attention was much on the cooling water that was of the Kakhovka reservoir. However, for us, for Greenpeace, our technical assessment was very clearly on the risk of the electricity supply before the Kakhovka and after the Kakhovka disaster. But what really made a huge impression, I think, is that it was clear that the Russian forces could do about anything, and it increasingly we were worried about a deliberate act of sabotage by Russian forces, by Rosatom experts, to sabotage the nuclear power plant with the aim to create a nuclear release into the environment. There's, however, another dimension to this, and there are 4 nuclear power plants in Ukraine, a part of the Chernobyl, the old Chernobyl, which is then the 5th. There are 4 nuclear power plants in Ukraine, and 3 are not under Russian occupation. However, 2 of them have been under attack by Russian missiles, and most prominently in September last year there was a missile attack very close to the reactor buildings of the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant, close to Yuzhno-Ukrainsk, where 300 meters from the reactor buildings a missile impacted and damaged especially the electricity infrastructure, which is a very severe event for nuclear safety, because a reactor power plant, a nuclear power plant, requires electricity to keep the cooling going on. And so it is a very severe, even if the reactor building itself was not impacted that much, it is a very severe safety-related issue. So making an overview of those 2 cases, looking at the kind of reactor type we have in Zaporizhzhia, which is a VVR 1000 reactor, where in the reactor building you have 6 reactor buildings, 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia. It's the largest in Europe power plant. But in each of those reactor buildings you have 2, not 1, but 2 largest sources of radioactivity, which is obviously the reactor core, where the heat is produced to produce electricity, but also the spent fuel pool, which actually contains a larger amount of radioactivity than is present in the reactor itself. However, it is at a lower temperature, but still requires active cooling. And so for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant today, all 6 reactors are in shutdown since September last year, and so this spent fuel, both in the core and in the spent fuel pool, has further cooled down. This means that if all cooling would stop, and there are many systems to keep cooling going, but if everything would stop, then there is an estimation that it would take between 1 and 2 weeks before you would have a core meltdown. It could still happen, but it would take a lot of time. And you could have a large nuclear disaster also in Zaporizhzhia. If you compare that with an operational nuclear reactor, this is a much shorter reaction time. However, our assessment is that the main risk is still at Zaporizhzhia. Why is that? Because at an operational nuclear reactor, which is under control by Ukraine, even if you have a military attack on the power plant and some systems fail, there's still many steps that the operator could take, the Ukrainian operator Rosatom could take in order to correct, to intervene. It would be very dangerous, but there could still be time, even if the time is shorter, to intervene. And so our main concern for that reason is at this point that a deliberate act, for instance at Zaporizhia, to lead to a nuclear release at the nuclear power plant. And of course, what could be the consequences? They could be far-reaching, and there's a whole range of scenarios. Not because there would be an accident, that it would necessarily lead to a large-scale release. However, the range of scenarios of releases is enormous, and Ukrainian authorities and also German institutes are doing an hourly simulation of dispersion models. If at a certain moment a release would happen, what would be the consequences? There's also this Austrian, I apologize for the spelling, but it's an Austrian modeling for Zaporizhia. It shows they have done 90 simulations under different weather patterns, like wind direction, air pressure, precipitation. And so, depending on these weather conditions, even a large scale of release would have a totally different impact. However, from a statistical point of view, it is clear that the most disruptive effect of such a release would be on Ukrainian territory, even if radioactivity would reach beyond the borders of Ukraine. The most disruptive effect would be in Ukraine. And that is exactly what worries us most. And then to finalize, as I said, there's a wide range of scenarios. It's not because there would be a release that it would have even a national, it could be more a local. At the low end of the spectrum, it could only be a local impact. However, if we look at the extreme level, it could be much worse than any accident we have so far seen in history, including the Chernobyl nuclear accident in 1986. And so that is related to the massive amount of radioactivity that is situated in the spent fuel pools that I referred to earlier. And so if you look at this extreme worst of the worst case in the spectrum, it could be like 100 times the release of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, or 20 times the cesium release from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This doesn't mean that this will necessarily happen, but this is the extreme level of what could happen. Thank you.
Дякую, Яне.
Thank you, Jan. Jan has made a very interesting presentation, but the presentation which shouldn't scare you, but that is information which is important to know it and to understand any kind of situation, because we live in a war and every day is unpredictable, and it is important to know the consequences of different scenarios at Zaporizhia power plant. And at the same time, Greenpeace, on their part, they do a lot for this catastrophe not to happen. And of course, at the moment, the Russian Federation is controlling the situation, and mainly that are the Russian troops. But Greenpeace is appealing to the European Union and to the states to sanction Rosatom and the Russian Federation, who were participating in the occupation of Zaporizhzhia and Chernobyl nuclear power plants and are responsible for everything that is happening on these NPPs. And I would like to tell about this more. I would like Shaun Burnie to tell about this more. I will introduce him briefly. Shaun Burnie works in Greenpeace since 1991, meaning that he is working here for around 32 years, and he works for 40 years in nuclear industry. And Shaun Burnie has experience in working in Japan, in Korea, and also in Fukushima. And since 1996, he has worked with a few missions on Chernobyl NPP, and after the full-scale war of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, Shaun has visited Chernobyl for 2 times, and he is ahead of the investigation on the Russian occupation of Chernobyl, the role of Rosatom, and also he is researching MAGATE, their actions on Zaporizhzhia power plant. The last week, Shaun, as a part of Greenpeace delegation, as a part of mission of Greenpeace, visited Chernobyl and also the southern oblast. And Shaun can tell more about the sanctions against Rosatom and also on the reports, very important reports, with the satellite photos which show the chronology of the Russian occupation of NPP, and Shaun, as the author of these reports, will tell you more.
Good afternoon. I'd like to talk a little bit about Rosatom, the occupier of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant together with Russian armed forces. The Rosatom Nuclear Corporation is a state Russian agency. In that sense, it serves the purpose of constructing, developing everything nuclear in the Russian Federation, but also overseas. It serves the strategic interests of the Russian state. And our analysis from February, March 2022 is effectively that without Rosatom, the deliberate targeting and occupation of the Chernobyl plant in February 2022 and the Zaporizhzhia plant in March 2022, and indeed the attempted attack on the Yuzhno-Ukrainsk South Ukraine nuclear plant, also in March 2022, would not have been possible for the Russian armed forces, for the Russian state. And in that sense, therefore, Rosatom is no ordinary corporation. Greenpeace, following the occupation of Zaporizhzhia, has been trying to understand the operations of both the Russian military and Rosatom at the nuclear plant. In September, we released an assessment by McKinsey Intelligence in the UK, which identified that, in fact, of course, the Zaporizhzhia plant is being used as a military platform by the Russian armed forces, by the Russian state, to target, in particular, the population in Dnipro on the other side of what was the Kakhovka reservoir, and identified firing locations between 1 and 18 kilometers from the Zaporizhzhia plant. That's only one aspect of how the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is being used strategically by the Russian state, by the Russian armed forces in this war against the people of Ukraine. And Rosatom is enabler. They are enabling this. They're with their own personnel from Rosatom, as indicated, flown in to Ukraine to occupy a Ukraine nuclear power plant. So our conclusion of that assessment of McKinsey was that not only are Rosatom occupying a nuclear power plant, enabling the Russian forces, but that the actual oversight of the site by the IAEA is flawed. The International Atomic Energy Agency is blocked from accessing key areas of the plant. There are only 4 staff from the IAEA. We have deep respect for their bravery on site, But unfortunately, the IAEA is not able to conduct and apply its mandate, its mission at the site. Consequently, there are serious questions about what the IAEA is doing at the Zaporizhzhia site, and an attempt to almost normalize the military occupation of what is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. And as we've heard, there's an enormous range of reactor scenarios that would release enormous amounts of radioactivity. And yet, if you continue to read the IAEA's reporting, which is normally once a week, it's effectively normalizing a situation which is very, very far from normal. And Rosatom is at the heart of this, and yet, Rosatom continues to operate not just inside the Russian Federation, but overseas and in partners. And just to highlight one example of Rosatom's atomic partners, this is the CEO of Rosatom, Mr. Tkachenko, with the CEO of Framatome of France. This is 3 months before the full-scale invasion in February 2022, where Rosatom and Framatome, a French state nuclear agency, are signing a deal for the cooperation to extend their long-standing relationship for the development of nuclear power overseas, in particular Framatome's involvement in supplying what's called instrumentation and control technology, which is the sort of brains of a nuclear power plant. And Rosatom are dependent upon Framatome because it's past EU regulations, and they're able to promote their overseas sales with that European sanctioned technology. Only in these last weeks, the Rosatom project in Hungary, the Paks nuclear plant, this is for 2 new reactors. The construction of the site has effectively begun, although the actual pouring of the reactor concrete will not be until next year. But only in the last weeks, and in fact in the last few days, we've heard the Hungarian foreign minister basically saying, we will not allow sanctions against Rosatom. What does that mean? Over the last year and a half, you've had demands for sanctions against many areas of the Russian state and their overseas business, but so far, no nuclear sanctions against Rosatom. And why is that? Because there's a vested interest, in large part by the European nuclear industry, backed by their governments, and in this case, Hungary, but also clearly the French state and Framatome, to effectively block any efforts to control Rosatom's and to stop Rosatom's business. Another dimension to the Paks project is it's not just a French-Russian program inside Hungary, the only one inside the EU. It's also a German project because Siemens, one of the largest corporations in Europe, is directly involved. An agreement long-standing with Rosatom. This is the current head of the supervisory board, former CEO of Siemens, only in the last few days basically defending Siemens' relationship with Rosatom and arguing that if they were to cancel supply of technology to the Hungary project, it would potentially cost them unlimited millions, assuming, therefore, that it would be sued by the Hungarian state. And this is about a nuclear trade with a nuclear company, Rosatom, that's in the illegal occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, threatening a nuclear disaster. There can be really no moral defense of an argument from Siemens on that. Our conclusion was, of course, that sanctions must be applied to Rosatom for terminating all nuclear trade with the Russian state by European partners. And that in particular applies to France, the Rosatom Corporation, and also Siemens. If we look at Zaporizhzhia itself, as we've heard, there is the potential for a severe radiological event. We're not calling it an accident. It would be most likely a deliberate act of sabotage by the Russian armed forces together with Rosatom, because they know about nuclear plants. That is unconscionable. There can be no defense of not maximizing the pressure against the Russian state, and in this case, against the Russian nuclear state, which is Rosatom. And therefore, our demands are that sanctions must be applied. They must be comprehensive. They must terminate ongoing cooperation between all European nuclear industries, in particular Framatome and Siemens. No new contracts. The transfer of technology, knowledge, including the operation of personnel from France and other countries at Russian nuclear plants, has to be immediately stopped. And then there's also the question about the International Atomic Energy Agency, and in particular how it's reporting to the Ukrainian government and to the international community about the operations at Zaporizhzhia, the operations of the Russian military and Rosatom. And with that, I will end. Thank you so much.
Дякую, Шон, і за
Thank you, Shaun, for your important work and for recording the war crimes of the Russians in Ukraine and at Ukrainian NPPs. Now we would like to pass the floor to the journalists and the guests of our meeting, of our event. If you have any questions, please, we will be glad to hear them. We can hear them from the audience, and also we have the option to ask a question in YouTube. You can ask them both in Ukrainian and in English language. Let's start from the audience. If there are any questions, we are ready to answer them. Yes, please. Thank you very much for your reports. And thank you very much for your attention to Ukraine, because when you are criticizing MAGATE, when you are criticizing the companies and the governments of the other countries, it sounds more important than when we are doing that, because we are considered to be a kind of stakeholder, and you are a neutral side. And therefore, we really appreciate that. And the question I have is, so in general, we do understand the motivation of the European business, which continues their cooperation with Rosatom. Then how can you explain that MAGATE doesn't want to sanction Rosatom and the Russian Federation? I think that Shaun Burnie is going to answer.
When you say the question about who doesn't want to sanction, you were talking about the EU, or you mentioned one name in particular?
Я запитував,
I was asking why MAGATE does not want to have sanctions, and not EU, European companies.
Question. If the IAEA were sitting on the stage here, Mr. Grossi, he would probably say we're a UN agency that is a secretariat. We have no political position, which to some extent is sort of true, but unfortunately it's also not true. The International Atomic Energy Agency has a primary role in the world to promote nuclear power, and that's long-standing in its statute from 1957, and it continues today. Something that Greenpeace finds deeply upsetting is that while you have 4 IAEA personnel trying to do the best of their ability at the Zaporizhzhia site, you have IAEA also working with Rosatom. Numerous events this year in the Russian Federation, co-hosted between Rosatom and the IAEA, nuclear training, nuclear security, nuclear material security workshops. And at the same time, you also see senior IAEA personnel, Mr. Chudakov, for example, attending opening ceremonies for Rosatom nuclear projects in Akuyu in Turkey, in Hungary, but also in St. Petersburg at Rosatom Expo conferences. So the IAEA is compromised. It won't take a position vis-a-vis sanctions, but in terms of actually what it wants the nuclear industry to continue to expand, and Rosatom as the effectively the world's largest nuclear company, is central to that. So at some point, when Ukraine ends this war by winning, the IAEA will go back to promoting, together with Rosatom, even more nuclear trade. So the IAEA is not an ally when it comes to sanctions against Rosatom.
Дякуємо. Чи є в нас ще запитання?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Thank you. Then we would like to move to the questions in chat. So we have the question from the journalist from Mykolaiv, Igor Danilov. So the question is, according to Reuters, Iran has the enriched uranium enough, the amount is enough to create 3 bombs, and they do not want to follow the UN's requirements. So what is the position of the Greenpeace regarding this issue?
Shaun, microphone closer, please.
Yeah, so Greenpeace has a long-standing concern about nuclear technology and the proliferation of nuclear technology. It predates Greenpeace, goes back to the early days of the development of nuclear weapons in the 1940s. And the problem is, if you develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, you also have the option, because it produces and requires nuclear materials, nuclear weapons materials, so-called fissile materials, plutonium and enriched uranium, that any country operating a nuclear power program has the potential to develop nuclear weapons. And that's the fundamental problem with the expansion and operation of nuclear power programs worldwide. It doesn't discriminate. Any one country that has that technology has the option. Many countries began their nuclear power programs in Europe, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland. They all had a nuclear weapons program as part of their general nuclear power program. So it's not unique to Iran, and clearly Iran would have that option with that technology, supplied by Rosatom, of course. But it's not a unique situation with Iran in the Middle East. All countries that have these nuclear programs have the option. So yeah, it's one of the reasons, of course, why Greenpeace is against the use of nuclear power.
Дякую, Shaun.
Thank you, Shaun. The next question from the chat is, how developed is the system of NPP catastrophe radiation response? So, of course, as far as I understand, we need to ask the state authorities this question, but maybe Pavlo can answer this question. That's a great question. In Ukraine, we have 4 NPPs. Well, in fact, 5. One of them is Chernobyl. 3 of them are operating, and one of them is Zaporizhzhia NPP, is on the temporary occupied territory, and it is occupied by the Russian troops. And every NPP has ASCRO system, that is automatic system of the radiation situation control around the stations, that is a 30-kilometer zone, and these systems have automatic monitoring, automatic radiation situation system monitoring, and there are 20 set of them on different distance from the station, and all of these data is available for the management of the NPP, also available to Energoatom, TSO. They are available for the Ukrainian regulator, and also available for MAGATE. And the data from 3 stations from Yuzhno-Ukrainsk, Khmelnytska, Rivne, and Rivne are available. All these systems are operating, and they are available to all our government, and unfortunately we do not have the information from ASCRO from Zaporizhzhia NPP, but on Zaporizhzhia NPP and around Zaporizhzhia NPP we have the system of monitoring, which were played there by MAGATE and also the representative of the MAGATE delegation. They are collecting data and they are publishing the reports in IRMI system. And where does and we get this information from their reports. So answering your question, as far as we understand, as we have these data and the data is always tracked, and unfortunately the ask for data from Zaporizhzhia NPP. So unfortunately, the data from Ukrainian stations, which are controlled by Ukraine territories, they are not in the public, they are not open source, and therefore I think that everything is controlled, and I think that the response would be immediate. Thank you. Thank you, Pavlo, and our speakers have something to add, as far as I understand.
For Greenpeace, there is a very high concern for the areas that are under occupation by Russia, where we lack a lot of information. But also there's no access to help the population that is under occupation, as we have seen after the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam on the site of the occupied territory, temporary occupied territory. There was no support to the population at all from the Russian side. If there would be a significant nuclear release from Zaporizhzhia, we don't have any hope that the population living under occupation would get in the right information and would get any support from Russian forces. So there is an absolute enormous concern regarding the occupied territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And we have one question from, вибачте, ще одне питання.
We have one more question. Does Greenpeace plan new missions to Ukraine? Shaun, Jan, would you like to answer?
So we have an important project here, one of maybe the most important project that I've ever been involved in with Greenpeace, and I'm sure Jan would agree, which is the green reconstruction of Ukraine. So we have Ukrainian staff, and you've met Polina and many others. For the nuclear work, we are continuing to investigate the situation in Chernobyl with the relevant Ukrainian authorities. And of course, with regards Zaporizhzhia and other nuclear plants, together with SaveDnipro, we're developing ideas for enhancing the overall survey network, sensor network for radiation. And we will continue to campaign outside Ukraine, in Europe in particular, for sanctions to be applied as rapidly as possible and as comprehensively as possible, demanding that the EU, the governments, the Council, the Commission, all apply maximum pressure on the Russian state and in particular Rosatom. So we will be continuing and enhancing that work.
Дякую, Shaun.
Thank you, Shaun. We also have one more question. Is it possible to replace nuclear power plants with the green energy, with the alternative energies?
Ян, будь ласка.
Yes, thank you for your question. And obviously the answer is technically yes. However, for Greenpeace today in Ukraine, it's generally known that Greenpeace is opposed to nuclear powers as such, but our focus is on what we can do now and what is needed for Ukraine. And that's not a campaign against nuclear power. We really focusing on the imminent threats from the Russian occupation and from attacks on nuclear power plants from the Russian side. This is the priority. And this is the only thing we're really focusing on, a part of the Chernobyl nuclear site, where the occupation of Russian forces has created many problems. We were in Chernobyl in July last year for the first time to study on invitation of the Ukrainian government, the consequences of the occupation, and there are many. And we are continuing also this research. We were there 2 weeks ago to continue the preparations of further research at Chernobyl, specifically with a focus on the consequences of, ongoing consequences of the Russian occupation of that site. So we are really focusing on these aspects. Regarding renewables and energy efficiency, there's an enormous potential especially in Ukraine, and especially now. We developed this first pilot project last year, which was demonstrated to the media and to the Ukrainian government and the German government and other governments in Horenka, near Bucha. It's a renovation of reconstruction of a hospital that was damaged by the war, but we reconstructed it in such a way that it also has improved energy efficiency and renewables, a heat pump. So this is for us a demonstration how these new technologies, efficiency and renewables, can improve the resilience of the country, the security of supply at a low cost, very fast. It can be implemented now, and they're not that vulnerable for any military activity. So there are very resilient technologies. This is the ideal investment that needs now, today, tomorrow, next month, need to scale up massively. This is the big advantage of the green technologies, to help Ukraine through investment immediately, because the winter is happening. We feel it when we walk in the street. It's getting colder, and so we need these investments now, not in a year, not in 2 years, but we need it now. Thank you.
Дякую, Ян.
Thank you, Jan. We have no further questions from the comments, and we have no further questions from the audience, as far as I understand. And therefore, I guess we are going to finish our conference. We would like to thank all of you who participated in this event. After this press conference, we shall send the press release to Ukrainian media and to the international media with the bullet points of everything, and we will send the link to the map to our website, to Green Reconstruction of Ukraine, and we urge you to visit our website. We have the web page on Facebook, and you can find the latest news on Greenpeace from our Facebook page. And also, we really appreciate our partner, SaveDnipro and Pavlo Tkachenko, for the support and organization of Greenpeace mission in Ukraine. And see you soon, because Greenpeace has announced that the missions in Ukraine will continue. Thank you.